The coffee mug shattered against the station floor as Sheriff Michael Harrison's weathered hand went limp, his 62-year-old frame frozen in absolute disbelief. Through the glass doors of Glacier Falls Police Station, a 400-pound grizzly bear stood on her hind legs, massive paws pressed together in an unmistakable gesture of desperate prayer. This wasn't supposed to happen. Wild bears don't seek human help. Deputy Martinez stumbled backward, his chair crashing into the dispatch console as panicked voices crackled through the radio. Officer Chen's hand trembled on her holstered weapon, her training warring with the impossible scene before them. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the bear's matted fur and the pool of blood trailing behind her massive form. But it was the bear's eyes that stopped Harrison's heart. Dark, intelligent, and achingly familiar, holding recognition that pierced through 15 years of buried memories. "Nobody move," Harrison whispered, his voice breaking with emotion he couldn't yet understand. How did a wild grizzly know his name? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sheriff Michael Bear Harrison had earned his nickname honestly over 3 decades of service in Glacier Falls, Montana. Unlike most lawmen in bear country, he'd never once drawn his weapon on the massive creatures that occasionally wandered into town. His philosophy was simple: respect them, and they'll respect you. It was wisdom passed down from his mother, Eleanor Harrison, who at 78 still reminded him daily that all God's creatures deserve compassion, honey. Eleanor had raised Michael alone after his father died in a logging accident when the boy was just 7. She'd worked double shifts at the elementary school, teaching by day and cleaning by night, never once complaining about their modest trailer or the second-hand clothes that marked them as different from the wealthier families in town. "We may not have much," she'd tell young Michael, "but we have each other, and that's more than some folks ever get." The Harrison family had always been different. Where others saw dangerous predators, they saw magnificent creatures struggling to survive in an increasingly crowded world. Michael's reputation as the Bear Whisperer had grown over the years, built on countless successful relocations and 0 fatalities. Tourists would sometimes ask how he did it, and he'd simply smile and say, "You talk to them like they're your family." But Michael carried wounds that ran deeper than his professional successes could heal. 15 years ago, his world had crumbled in a single night. His wife, Sarah, had died in a car accident during a blizzard, sliding off Highway 2 while rushing to pick up their 20-year-old son, Tommy, from a bar fight in Kalispell. Tommy had blamed his father for the accident, screaming through tears that if Michael hadn't been such a disappointment, Mom wouldn't have had to come rescue his worthless son. The next morning, Tommy was gone, leaving behind only a note. "Don't look for me. I'm not your problem anymore." Eleanor never spoke ill of her grandson, but Michael often caught her staring at Tommy's old-school photos, her arthritic fingers tracing his young face. She'd mortgaged her small house 3 times over the years to help with medical bills and town emergencies, never saying no when someone needed help. Her Social Security barely covered her heart medication, but she'd still slip $20 bills into the church collection plate every Sunday. Dr. Sarah Chen had arrived in Glacier Falls 2 years ago, bringing with her advanced veterinary training and a mysterious past she rarely discussed. The 38-year-old wildlife specialist worked primarily with the National Park Service, but she'd developed a close working relationship with Michael's department. There was something about her dedication to injured animals that reminded Michael of his own calling, though he'd noticed she always grew quiet whenever anyone mentioned illegal hunting or poaching rings. The town itself reflected the economic struggles plaguing rural Montana. Tourism had declined, young families were moving away for jobs, and the remaining residents, mostly retirees and ranchers, watched their community slowly fade. Yet somehow people still looked out for each other, bound together by the harsh beauty of the landscape and the shared understanding that in bear country you either learned to coexist or you didn't survive. 72 hours before the grizzly bear would stumble through the doors of Glacier Falls Police Station, Thomas "Tommy" Morrison crouched in the pre-dawn darkness, his calloused hands trembling as he positioned the steel jaw trap among the wild berry bushes. The 35-year-old man bore little resemblance to the clean-cut college boy who'd left town 15 years ago. His face was weathered and scarred, his once bright eyes now hollow with desperation and something darker, a rage that had been festering for over a decade. Tommy had chosen this location carefully. The game trail showed fresh signs of a large grizzly, and the nearby creek would mask any human scent. He'd studied the patterns for weeks, noting the times when the mother bear brought her cubs to drink. His hands shook not from cold, but from the weight of what he was about to do. The black market dealers in Billings had been clear. They needed live bears, preferably cubs, for wealthy collectors who paid premium prices for exotic pets. A healthy grizzly cub could bring $20,000, enough to settle his gambling debts and maybe, just maybe, buy him a fresh start somewhere far from Montana. The irony wasn't lost on him. Tommy Morrison had legally changed his surname from Harrison 5 years ago, wanting nothing that connected him to the father who'd chosen animals over family. Yet here he was, about to trap the very creatures his father had spent a lifetime protecting. "Poetic justice," he muttered, adjusting the chain that would hold his prey until the buyers arrived. But as Tommy worked, memories he'd tried to bury began surfacing. He remembered being 8 years old, watching his father bottle feed an orphaned bear cub behind their house. His mother had been horrified. "Michael, that thing will grow up to kill someone." But his father had been patient, gentle, treating the tiny creature like it was his own child. Tommy had named the cub Honey because of her golden fur, and for 3 months she'd been like a sister to him. The memory made Tommy's chest tighten with a pain he'd thought he'd outgrown. He forced himself to focus on the present, on the crushing debt that had driven him to this desperate act. The casino bosses in Nevada weren't known for their patience, and the broken ribs from his last reminder meeting still ached with every breath. 20,000 would buy him time, maybe even forgiveness. 48 hours later, Tommy's trap had worked exactly as planned, and horribly wrong. He'd expected to find a cub, something small and manageable. Instead, the massive female grizzly stood protectively over her injured offspring, her dark eyes blazing with maternal fury that made Tommy's blood run cold. The cub, barely 6 months old, whimpered pitifully as the steel jaws held its hind leg in a grip that was already causing dangerous swelling. "Jesus Christ," Tommy whispered, his rifle feeling useless in his shaking hands. This wasn't what he'd planned. He'd wanted a quick, clean capture. Not this scene of raw, primal anguish that reminded him too much of his own mother's final moments in that twisted wreckage on Highway 2. The mother bear, who locals had named Athena for her intelligence and protective nature, had tried everything to free her cub. Tommy could see the evidence: torn earth, broken branches, and deep claw marks on nearby trees where she'd vented her frustration. Blood stained the ground around the trap, some from the cub's wounded leg, but more from Athena's paws where she'd tried desperately to pry the steel jaws apart. But it was the sound that nearly broke Tommy's resolve, a low, mournful keening that spoke of grief beyond words. He'd heard his father make a similar sound the night his mother died, a raw expression of loss that no human language could capture. Tommy raised his rifle, knowing he should end this quickly. Take what he could sell and leave, but his finger wouldn't pull the trigger. 24 hours before his father would recognize the prayer gesture that Tommy himself had taught a bear cub named Honey, Tommy made a decision that surprised him. Instead of finishing what he'd started, he backed away, leaving the trap set but unable to complete the transaction. He told himself he was just postponing the inevitable, that he'd return when he was stronger, when the memory of his mother's voice wasn't echoing so loudly in his mind. What Tommy didn't know was that Athena had been watching, learning, remembering. As he retreated to his cabin to drink away his doubts, the intelligent grizzly was forming a plan that would either save her cub or cost them both their lives. She remembered a scent from long ago, a gentle voice that had once offered safety to a creature much like herself. In her desperation, she would bet everything on a connection that spanned 15 years of separation and heartbreak. The clock was ticking, and both species were about to discover that love and desperation could drive any mother to unimaginable acts of courage. The recognition hit Michael Harrison like a physical blow, stealing his breath and sending him stumbling backward against his desk. The small scar on the grizzly's snout, a thin white line just above her left nostril, was as familiar as his own reflection. 15 years melted away in an instant, and suddenly he was 37 again, cradling a 3-month-old bear cub while his wife Sarah pleaded with him to call Fish and Wildlife. "Honey," he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. The massive grizzly's ears twitched at the sound, and she lowered her head in a gesture of recognition that sent chills down Michael's spine. This was impossible. The orphaned cub he'd raised in secret, bottle-feeding her through cold Montana nights, teaching her simple commands and, yes, even that ridiculous prayer pose that had made his young son Tommy laugh until his sides ached. But Honey should be dead by now, or at least living hundreds of miles away. Grizzlies didn't live near human settlements, and they certainly didn't remember childhood lessons after 15 years of wilderness survival. "Sheriff, what are you doing?" Deputy Martinez's voice cracked with fear as Michael slowly approached the bear. "Sir, please step back. That thing could kill you with one swipe." But Athena, Honey, made no aggressive moves. Instead, she repeated the prayer gesture, her massive paws pressed together, while her dark eyes pleaded with an intelligence that defied everything Michael thought he knew about wild animal behavior. She was trying to tell him something, and every instinct he'd developed over 3 decades of police work screamed that time was running out. "She wants me to follow her," Michael said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a random encounter. Honey had sought him out specifically, remembered where to find him, trusted him enough to approach armed humans in their own territory. "Something's happened to her cub." "Sheriff, you can't be serious." Officer Chen had her weapon drawn but pointed at the floor, her training warring with the surreal scene before them. "Even if this bear somehow knows you, she's still a wild predator. Following her into the woods is suicide." Michael was already reaching for his jacket. 15 years of guilt and regret crystallized into a single moment of absolute certainty. He'd failed his wife, failed his son, failed everyone who'd ever mattered to him. But he wouldn't fail Honey. Not again. "Call Dr. Chen at the Wildlife Center. Tell her to meet us at the North Trailhead with emergency medical supplies. And Martinez—" "I'm coming with you," the younger deputy interrupted, already grabbing his gear. "Sir, you're not going out there alone with a grizzly bear." "And that's not happening on my watch." The 20-minute drive to the trailhead felt like hours. Athena had led them to Michael's patrol car with surprising patience, staying just ahead of the vehicle as they wound through the mountain roads. Twice she'd stopped and looked back, as if checking to make sure they were still following. Michael's mind raced through the implications. How had she known where to find him? How long had she been watching? And most terrifyingly, what had happened to her cub that would drive a mother grizzly to such desperate measures? Dr. Sarah Chen was waiting at the trailhead with a portable veterinary kit and an expression of barely controlled panic. "Michael, When dispatch said a grizzly bear had walked into the police station, I thought someone was having a breakdown. Please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve getting mauled to death. This is Honey, Michael said simply, watching Sarah's face transform as understanding dawned. He'd told her the story months ago during one of their long conversations about wildlife rehabilitation. She came to me for help. The hike into the woods was unlike anything Michael had experienced in 30 years of law enforcement. Athena moved with purpose, occasionally glancing back to ensure the humans were keeping pace. She led them off the main trail onto a game path that wound deeper into the forest, past fallen logs and through dense undergrowth that would have been impossible to navigate without her guidance. After 45 minutes of climbing, Athena stopped at what appeared to be a natural cave formation hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss and fallen branches. Her behavior changed immediately. She began pacing, whining softly, performing the prayer gesture repeatedly with increasing urgency. "Oh God," Sarah whispered as they pushed through the vegetation. "Michael, over here." The bear cub lay motionless on a bed of leaves and pine needles, its right hind leg mangled by what was obviously a steel jaw trap. The baby grizzly couldn't have been more than 6 months old, its golden brown fur matted with blood and dirt. Its breathing was shallow and labored, and even from several feet away, Michael could smell the sickening scent of infection setting in. But it was the trap itself that made Michael's blood run cold. Stamped into the metal was a logo he recognized, a mountain peak with crossed rifles beneath it, Morrison Hunting Supplies. His son's adopted name, the surname Tommy had chosen specifically to erase any connection to the Harrison family. "Can you save it?" Michael asked Sarah, though he already knew the answer from her grim expression. "Maybe," she said, unpacking her emergency supplies with practiced efficiency. "But this cub needs surgery, blood transfusions, and antibiotics we don't have here." "And Michael," she held up the trap, pointing to the fresh gouges in the metal. "Someone set this deliberately. This wasn't an accident." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of breaking branches announced another presence in the clearing. Michael's hand went instinctively to his weapon as a figure emerged from the tree line, a man with weathered features and hollow eyes that Michael recognized despite 15 years of separation and heartbreak. "Hello, Dad," Tommy Morrison said, his rifle pointing directly at Athena's massive head. The silence stretched between father and son like a chasm that 15 years of separation had carved too deep to cross. Michael's hand remained steady on his holstered weapon, but his heart hammered against his ribs as he studied the stranger his boy had become. Tommy's face bore new scars, a jagged line across his left cheek, a crooked nose that spoke of violence, and eyes that held the hollow look of a man who'd seen too much of the world's ugliness. "Tommy," Michael's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Son, what are you doing here?" "Don't call me son." Tommy's response was sharp as broken glass, but his rifle wavered slightly. "You lost that right the night Mom died, coming to clean up my mess. You lost it every time you chose those damn animals over your own family." Dr. Sarah Chen continued working frantically over the injured cub, her hands moving with practiced precision as she tried to stabilize the small creature's vital signs. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. The son who'd rejected his father's values now held a gun on the very bear that had come seeking that same father's help. Athena watched Tommy with intelligent eyes, her massive body coiled with tension but showing no signs of aggression. "Your trap," Michael said, nodding toward the steel jaws that had nearly cost the cub its life. "Tommy, what have you become?" For a moment, something flickered across Tommy's weathered features. Shame, perhaps, or the ghost of the idealistic young man he'd once been. "I became what I had to become to survive, old man." "You think it's been easy these past 15 years?" You think I wanted to end up setting traps for innocent animals?" The words hung in the mountain air like smoke, and Michael felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on his shoulders. He'd replayed that terrible night thousands of times, wondering what he could have done differently. If he'd answered Tommy's call for help immediately instead of finishing his report, if he'd driven to Kalispell himself instead of asking Sarah to go, if he'd been a different kind of father, the kind who put family obligations before duty to community and wildlife. "The gambling debts," Dr. Chen said suddenly, not looking up from her patient. "They're real, aren't they? That's why you're doing this." Tommy's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. $50,000 by the end of the month, or they start breaking things that don't heal. This cub would have brought in 20 grand, maybe more if I could have taken it alive. Would have? Michael seized on the past tense. "Tommy, you could still—" "No!" The rifle swung back toward Athena, who had begun moving slowly toward her injured offspring. "I can't. Don't you understand? I tried to walk away yesterday, tried to convince myself I could find another way, but there is no other way. Not for someone like me." Deputy Martinez, who had been quietly circling around the clearing's perimeter, froze as Tommy's attention shifted to him. The young officer had his weapon drawn but couldn't risk a shot with the grizzly bear positioned between him and the target. One wrong move could trigger a tragedy that would destroy what remained of the Harrison family. "Someone like you," Michael repeated, taking a careful step forward. "What does that mean, son? You're a good person who's made some bad choices, but that doesn't define who you are." Tommy's laugh was bitter, devoid of any warmth. "A good person? Dad, I've done things these past 15 years that would make you sick. I've hurt people, stolen from people, destroyed families just like ours. I'm not the boy you raised anymore. That kid died the same night Mom did." The cub stirred weakly under Dr. Chen's ministrations, letting out a small whimper that seemed to pierce the tension in the clearing. Athena responded immediately, a low rumbling sound emanating from deep in her chest. Not a growl of aggression, but the comforting vocalization of a mother trying to soothe her baby. The sound triggered something in Tommy's expression, a crack in the hardened facade he'd built around his heart. "I remember that sound," he whispered, his rifle lowering slightly. "From Honey, when she was little and scared. She used to make that exact same noise when thunderstorms woke her up at night." Michael felt a surge of hope. "This is Honey, Tommy. She's grown up now, has a family of her own, and she remembered us, remembered the love we showed her when she needed help, just like she's asking for help now." "It's not that simple." Tommy's voice cracked with emotion he'd been suppressing for years. "You think love fixes everything? You think it brings back the dead or pays off debts to dangerous men? Love doesn't solve problems, Dad. It creates them." "Doctor." Chen looked up from her patient, her face grim. "This cub is going into shock. We need to get it to my clinic immediately, or we're going to lose it. Whatever family drama you two need to work through, it can wait until after I save this baby's life." But Tommy shook his head, his grip on the rifle tightening again. "No clinic, no rescue. This ends here, one way or another." He paused, struggling with words that seemed to tear at his throat. "Do you know what it's like to become the thing you once hated most? To look in the mirror and see a monster wearing your father's eyes?" Eleanor Harrison's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Thomas Morrison Harrison, you put that gun down this instant." Everyone turned in shock to see the 78-year-old woman emerging from the tree line, leaning heavily on a walking stick, but moving with the determined purpose that had carried her through decades of hardship and loss. Behind her came two more figures, federal agents in dark clothing with weapons drawn but not yet aimed. "Grandma?" Tommy's voice sounded like that of a confused child. "How did you—" "What are you doing here?" Eleanor's weathered face was stern but not unkind as she approached her grandson. "I've been watching you for months, honey. Knew you were back in Montana. Knew you were in trouble. Been working with these federal boys to help you find a way out that didn't involve destroying everything your daddy taught you about right and wrong." The federal agent stepped forward, their leader addressing Tommy with surprising gentleness. "Mr. Harrison, yes, I'm using your real name. We've been tracking the illegal wildlife trafficking ring you've been forced to work with. We know about the debts, the threats, the impossible position they put you in. We also know you've been feeding us information about their operations for the past 6 months." Tommy stared at the agents in confusion. "What are you talking about? I never—" "Every trap you set was called into our tip line within hours," the lead agent continued. "Every location, every time, always from an untraceable phone. You've helped us save dozens of animals and identify the major players in this trafficking network. You've been our best asset without even knowing it." The rifle slipped from Tommy's numb fingers as understanding dawned. He looked at Eleanor with wonder and growing comprehension. "The anonymous tips. That was you?" Eleanor's smile was sad but proud. "Honey, did you really think I'd let my grandson become something he wasn't? I've been cleaning up your messes and protecting you from yourself since you were in diapers. Why would I stop now?" Dr. Chen seized the moment of distraction to administer a crucial injection to the cub, whose breathing had grown dangerously shallow. "We still need to move this baby immediately. Whatever resolution you all are working toward, it needs to happen on the way to my clinic." Michael looked at his son, his mother, and the federal agents, then at Athena, who had moved protectively over her cub but showed no signs of aggression toward the humans trying to help. In this moment, surrounded by the family he'd thought lost forever and the bear he'd raised with love decades ago, he felt the first stirring of hope he'd experienced in 15 years. "Tommy," he said softly, extending his hand toward the son he'd never stopped loving. "Come home." The ride to Dr. Chen's wildlife clinic became a desperate race against time as the bear cub's condition deteriorated rapidly in the back of her modified veterinary van. Tommy sat beside his father in stunned silence, still processing the revelation that his grandmother had been orchestrating his protection for months without his knowledge. The federal agents had explained during the hurried transfer that the wildlife trafficking ring had been using Tommy as an unwilling pawn, threatening not just him but his entire family if he refused to cooperate. "Your grandmother contacted us 6 months ago," Agent Rodriguez had said while carefully loading the unconscious cub into a specialized transport carrier. "She knew you were in trouble before you even came back to Montana. Smart woman. She's been our eyes and ears this whole operation." Now, as Dr. Chen's van navigated the winding mountain roads toward town, Michael found himself stealing glances at the son he hadn't seen in 15 years. Tommy looked older than his 35 years, weathered by experiences that had clearly tested him beyond his limits. But beneath the scars and the hollow expression, Michael could still see traces of the idealistic young man who had once planned to become a wildlife biologist, following in his father's footsteps of protecting rather than exploiting nature. "Dad." Tommy's voice was barely audible over the van's engine and the medical equipment monitoring the cub's vital signs. "I need you to know, I never wanted this. When I changed my name, when I left, I thought I was protecting you and Grandma from the kind of person I was becoming." Michael's throat tightened with emotion he'd been holding back for 15 years. "Son, you were 20 years old and grieving your mother. We all made mistakes that night. I should have been there for you instead of trying to solve everyone else's problems." In the back of the van, Dr. Chen worked frantically to stabilize her patient. The cub's blood pressure was dropping dangerously low, and the infection from the trap wound was spreading faster than she'd anticipated. "I need to call ahead to the clinic," she announced, reaching for her radio. "We're going to need a full surgical team and blood supplies. This little one is going to need everything we can throw at it." Eleanor Harrison, who had insisted on riding along despite protests about her age and health, watched the medical drama unfold with the steady calm of someone who had weathered decades of family crises. "That bear's got fight in her," she said, gently stroking the cub's fur through the carrier bars. "Just like her mama, just like this family." As they approached the outskirts of Glacier Falls, Michael's radio crackled to life with an urgent message from dispatch. "Sheriff Harrison, we've got a problem. Multiple reports of armed men in vehicles heading toward the wildlife clinic. License plates match those on the federal watch list for the trafficking ring." Agent Rodriguez, who had been following in a separate vehicle, immediately responded over the tactical frequency. "All units be advised. Subjects are considered extremely dangerous and are likely armed with high-powered weapons. They know their operation has been compromised, and they're desperate." Tommy's face went pale as the implication sank in. "They know. Somehow they figured out that I've been feeding information to the feds. Jesus, they're not just coming for the bear. They're coming for all of us." Dr. Chen's clinic sat on the edge of town, a converted farmhouse surrounded by specialized enclosures for recovering wildlife. Under normal circumstances, it would have been the perfect place for emergency surgery on an injured bear cub. But as their convoy approached, it became clear that they were driving into an ambush. 3 black SUVs were positioned strategically around the property, and Michael could see the glint of rifle scopes in the afternoon sunlight. "Turn around," Tommy urged, his voice tight with fear. "Dad, please, these aren't local troublemakers. These are professional killers who specialize in making problems disappear. They won't hesitate to hurt innocent people." But before Michael could respond, one of the SUVs moved to block their retreat, effectively trapping them on the narrow access road. The lead vehicle's passenger door opened, and a man in expensive outdoor gear stepped out, assault rifle held casually but ready for immediate use. "Tommy Morrison," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly across the mountain air. "You've been a very naughty boy. Time to pay your debts." Agent Rodriguez was already coordinating backup over his radio, but Michael knew that help was at least 30 minutes away. The nearest state police unit was handling a traffic emergency on the other side of the county, and local backup consisted of 2 part-time deputies who weren't equipped for this level of armed confrontation. Dr. Chen made the decision for all of them. "There's an old logging road about a quarter-mile back. If we can make it there, it leads to the rear entrance of the clinic. I can perform emergency surgery in the field if necessary, but we need to get this cub stabilized in the next hour, or we're going to lose it." The next few minutes unfolded like a nightmare choreographed in slow motion. Michael threw the van into reverse, tires screaming against asphalt as he executed a dangerous high-speed turn that sent everyone scrambling for handholds. Behind them, Athena had been following at a distance, her massive form moving through the forest parallel to the road. Now, as gunfire erupted from the pursuing vehicles, the mother grizzly emerged from the tree line with a roar that seemed to shake the mountains themselves. What happened next defied everything Michael thought he knew about wildlife behavior. Instead of fleeing from the noise and chaos, Athena charged directly at the lead SUV, her 400-pound frame moving with surprising speed and agility. The traffickers, who had been prepared for armed resistance from federal agents, were completely unprepared for an enraged mother grizzly defending her young. "She's buying us time," Tommy said in amazement, watching through the van's rear window as Athena systematically disabled 2 of the pursuing vehicles by crushing their front ends with her powerful claws. "That bear is risking her life to protect her baby and us." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. A wild animal was displaying more loyalty and courage than most humans ever managed, putting herself in mortal danger to help the very species that had created this crisis in the first place. Dr. Chen managed to navigate the logging road despite the van's unwieldy size and the rough terrain. The rear entrance to her clinic was hidden among tall pines and accessible only to those who knew the property intimately. But as they approached the back building, it became clear that their problems were far from over. Eleanor's sharp eyes spotted the danger first. "There's someone in the clinic," she said quietly, pointing to a shadow moving past one of the windows. "They got here ahead of us." Agent Rodriguez's voice came over the radio with grim confirmation. "We've lost contact with the local units. Assumption is that the trafficking ring has people positioned throughout the town." "Sheriff, you're on your own until we can coordinate a proper response." The bear cub chose that moment to go into cardiac arrest, its small body convulsing as Dr. Chen fought desperately to restart its failing heart. The portable defibrillator's high-pitched whine filled the van as she prepared for emergency resuscitation, but everyone knew that without proper surgical facilities, their chances of success were minimal. Tommy looked at his father, his grandmother, and the woman who was fighting to save an innocent life, and something fundamental shifted in his expression. The hollow, defeated look was replaced by a determination that reminded Michael powerfully of the young man who had once dreamed of protecting wildlife. "I know another way," Tommy said, checking his sidearm with practiced efficiency. "There's an old storm shelter behind the clinic that connects to the basement. Dr. Chen can set up her equipment there while I deal with whoever's waiting inside." "Son, you can't," Michael began, but Tommy was already moving toward the van's rear door. "Yes, I can," Tommy interrupted, his voice carrying a conviction that had been missing for 15 years. "For once in my miserable life, I can do something right. Something Mom would have been proud of. Something that honors what you tried to teach me about protecting the innocent." Eleanor reached out and caught Tommy's hand before he could leave the van. Her weathered fingers closed around his with surprising strength, and when she spoke, her voice carried all the love and wisdom of 8 decades of living. "Tommy Harrison," she said, using his birth name with deliberate emphasis, "you remember what I taught you about being a man. It's not about never falling down, it's about what you do when you get back up." As if responding to the emotional intensity of the moment, the bear cub's heart began beating again, its tiny chest rising and falling with renewed life. Dr. Chen looked up from her equipment with tears in her eyes and hope in her voice. "We got a chance," she said. "But we need that surgical suite, and we need it now." Tommy nodded, checked his weapon one final time, and stepped out into the Montana wilderness to face whatever waited in the shadows of the clinic. Behind him, 3 generations of Harrisons and 1 determined veterinarian prepared for the fight of their lives, while somewhere in the forest, a mother grizzly continued her own desperate battle to protect the family that had once shown her the meaning of love. The gunshot that echoed through the Montana wilderness seemed to fracture time itself, leaving Michael Harrison frozen in a moment of absolute terror as he watched his son disappear into the clinic's rear entrance. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound could have been. No shout of triumph, no cry for help, just the hollow absence of certainty that every parent fears most. "Tommy!" Eleanor's voice cracked as she struggled against Michael's restraining arms, desperate to follow her grandson into whatever danger waited beyond those doors. At 78, she had buried her husband, watched her son's marriage crumble, and endured 15 years of not knowing whether her grandson was dead or alive. The possibility of losing him now, just moments after their reunion, was more than her weathered heart could bear. Dr. Chen continued working frantically over the bear cub, her hands steady despite the chaos erupting around them. The small creature had stabilized temporarily, but she could see the telltale signs of impending organ failure, the shallow breathing, the weak pulse, the way its tiny body seemed to be shutting down system by system. Without immediate surgery and blood transfusions, they had perhaps 20 minutes before the damage became irreversible. "I can't wait any longer," she announced, her professional training overriding the emotional turmoil of the moment. "This cub is dying, and every minute we delay reduces its chances of survival. I'm going to have to operate right here, right now, with whatever supplies I can improvise." The van became an impromptu surgical theater as Dr. Chen spread sterile drapes across the floor and began preparing her instruments. Michael found himself assisting, his police training and emergency medical response proving unexpectedly valuable as he helped maintain the cub's airway while Dr. Chen worked to repair the severe damage to its hind leg. Outside, the sounds of gunfire had erupted sporadically, punctuated by roars that could only have come from Athena as she continued her own battle against the traffickers. Michael's radio crackled with fragmented reports from Agent Rodriguez, something about multiple casualties and the need for immediate medical evacuation, but the static made it impossible to determine whether Tommy was among the wounded. "Grandpa Mike?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper as she knelt beside the makeshift operating table, her arthritic hands gentle as she stroked the cub's fur. "This little one looks just like Honey did when you first brought her home. Same golden markings around the eyes, same stubborn set to the jaw even when unconscious." The observation hit Michael like a physical blow because Eleanor was right. The resemblance was unmistakable. This wasn't just any bear cub. This was Honey's offspring, making it as close to a grandchild as Michael was likely to ever have. The realization that he might lose both his human and bear families in the same day was almost too much to process. Dr. Chen's surgical tools clicked with mechanical precision as she worked to reconstruct the cub's mangled leg. The trap had done extensive damage to muscle, bone, and major blood vessels, requiring repairs that would have challenged even a fully equipped veterinary hospital. Working in the cramped confines of a van, with improvised lighting and limited supplies, she was attempting the impossible. "Blood pressure's dropping again," Michael reported, watching the portable monitor with growing alarm. "Sarah, I think we're losing it." For a moment, Dr. Chen's composure cracked, and Michael saw the exhaustion and desperation she'd been hiding behind her professional facade. "I can't work miracles," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This cub needs whole blood, needs a full surgical team, needs resources we simply don't have. I'm trying to save it with the equivalent of battlefield medicine." Eleanor looked up from where she knelt beside the cub, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sometimes battlefield medicine is all we have, honey. Sometimes you just have to trust that love is stronger than the tools you're working with." As if summoned by her words, the van's rear door burst open, revealing Tommy with blood streaming from a gash across his forehead and his shirt torn from what had clearly been a violent struggle. But he was alive, conscious, and carrying a small cooler that he thrust toward Dr. Chen with shaking hands. "Blood supplies," he gasped, leaning heavily against the van's frame. "Found them in the clinic's emergency refrigerator before those bastards could destroy everything. Type O universal donor. Should work for most mammals." Dr. Chen grabbed the cooler with desperate efficiency, immediately beginning the process of cross-matching and preparing for a transfusion. "Tommy, you're bleeding. We need to—" "I'm fine," he interrupted, though the pallor of his face suggested otherwise. "The clinic's secure now. Federal agents finally showed up and cornered the remaining traffickers, but Dad—" His voice broke as he looked directly at Michael for the first time since entering the van. "I had to kill a man in there. First time I've ever taken a human life. And it was to protect a bear cub that most people would say isn't worth dying for." Michael reached out and pulled his son against his chest, feeling the tremors that shook Tommy's frame as the adrenaline began to wear off. "You protected innocent life, son. That's what we do. That's who we are." But even as he spoke the words, Michael could see that victory might be coming too late. Despite the blood transfusion and Dr. Chen's heroic surgical efforts, the bear cub's vital signs continued to weaken. The small creature that had brought his family back together was slipping away before their eyes, and there seemed to be nothing any of them could do to prevent it. Outside, Athena's roars had grown increasingly desperate as her maternal instincts told her that her offspring was in mortal danger. The great bear had survived her own battle with the traffickers, but now faced the most terrible defeat of all: the loss of her child, despite having successfully brought it to the very humans who had once saved her own life. Eleanor's weathered hand found Michael's as they watched Dr. Chen fight for the cub's life. And in that moment, 3 generations of Harrisons understood that some battles couldn't be won through courage or determination or love. Sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, the innocent suffered and died, leaving behind only the hollow ache of what might have been. The monitors showed flat-lining vital signs as the bear cub's small heart finally stopped beating, taking with it the hope and redemption that the Harrison family had dared to believe was within their grasp. The silence that followed the flatline was absolute, broken only by Eleanor Harrison's soft weeping and the distant sound of federal agents securing the clinic grounds. Dr. Chen stared at the motionless form of the bear cub, her hands still positioned over the tiny chest as if willing life back into the small body. Tommy slumped against the van's wall, blood from his head wound mixing with tears he hadn't shed in 15 years. "I'm sorry," Dr. Chen whispered, her voice hollow with defeat. "I'm so sorry. I tried everything." "You did everything humanly possible," Michael said, though his own voice cracked with grief. Outside, Athena's mournful keening had grown so intense it seemed to echo off the mountains themselves, a sound of loss that transcended species and spoke to the universal pain of a mother losing her child. But Eleanor Harrison, who had lived through 8 decades of joy and sorrow, was not ready to accept defeat. Her weathered hands moved to the cub's chest, and she began pressing rhythmically with a technique she'd learned during her years as an elementary school teacher trained in CPR. "Sometimes," she said, her voice steady despite her tears, "sometimes miracles wear ordinary clothes." "Eleanor, please," Dr. Chen said gently. "The cub has been flatlined for over 3 minutes. Even if we could restart the heart, the brain damage would be—" "Hush," Eleanor interrupted, continuing her compressions with the determination of someone who had never learned to quit. "This little one is family. Family doesn't give up on family." As if responding to the old woman's fierce love, a faint blip appeared on the heart monitor. Then another. Dr. Chen grabbed her stethoscope, pressing it to the cub's chest with trembling hands. "I'm hearing something," she whispered. "Weak, but it's there." The bear cub's eyes fluttered open, dark brown orbs that seemed to focus directly on Eleanor's face. A tiny paw reached up, touching the old woman's wrinkled cheek with surprising gentleness. The gesture was so human, so filled with recognition and gratitude that everyone in the van fell silent with wonder. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," Eleanor breathed, using an expression that made Tommy smile through his tears. "Little one, you've got more fight in you than a wolverine with a toothache." But the miracle was only the beginning of revelations that would reshape everything the Harrison family thought they knew about their past 15 years. Agent Rodriguez appeared at the van's rear door, his expression grim as he motioned for Michael to step outside for a private conversation. "Sheriff, we need to talk," the federal agent said quietly. "What we've learned about your son's involvement in this trafficking ring, it's not what any of us thought." Michael felt his stomach clench with new dread. After everything they'd just been through, after Tommy's heroic actions in the clinic, what fresh horror was about to be revealed? Agent Rodriguez, if Tommy broke federal laws, we'll deal with the consequences, but that's just it, Rodriguez interrupted. He didn't break any laws. Sheriff, your son has been working undercover for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the past 3 years. The gambling debts, the threats, the desperate circumstances, it was all part of a deep cover operation designed to infiltrate the largest wildlife trafficking organization in the Northwest. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. That's impossible. Tommy hasn't been in contact with us for 15 years. He changed his name, rejected everything about... The name change was part of his cover identity, Rodriguez explained, and the lack of contact with family was a security requirement. Sheriff, your son has been risking his life for 3 years to protect the same wildlife you've spent your career defending. He's taken beatings, lived in constant danger, and allowed his own family to believe he'd become everything he despised, all to build a case that's going to shut down trafficking operations across 4 states. Inside the van, Dr. Chen was monitoring the cub's stabilizing vital signs while Eleanor continued her gentle ministrations. But Tommy had overheard enough of the conversation outside to understand what was being revealed. His face had gone pale, not from blood loss, but from the realization that his carefully constructed cover story was about to crumble. "Dad," Tommy said quietly when Michael returned to the van, "there are things I need to tell you. Things I should have told you years ago, but I couldn't without risking the operation and putting you and Grandma in danger." Eleanor looked up from the recovering cub, her eyes sharp with the intelligence that had made her one of the most respected teachers in Glacier County. "Tommy Harrison, I've known you were one of the good guys since the day you were born. Did you really think your old grandmother couldn't tell the difference between a boy who'd lost his way and a man who was fighting the devil in his own backyard?" The confession that followed revealed layers of deception and sacrifice that stunned even Michael's experienced law enforcement perspective. Tommy explained how he'd been recruited by federal agents 2 years after leaving Montana, how his apparent descent into criminal behavior had been carefully orchestrated to establish credibility with the trafficking networks. The gambling debts were real, but they'd been incurred as part of his cover. The violence, the desperation, the apparent betrayal of everything his father had taught him, all of it had been an elaborate performance designed to protect wildlife and bring down criminals. "The hardest part," Tommy said, his voice breaking as he watched Eleanor gently stroke the recovering cub, "was letting you both think I'd become a monster. Every day for 3 years I wanted to call, wanted to come home, wanted to tell you that I was still the son you raised, but one wrong word, one moment of weakness, and the whole operation would have collapsed." Dr. Chen looked up from her patient with wonder in her eyes. "Tommy, you've been feeding information to federal agencies about trafficking routes, drop locations, key players. That's how we've been able to save so many animals over the past few years. You've been a guardian angel working in the shadows. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come." Agent Rodriguez returned with a thick file and an expression of barely contained amazement. "Sheriff Harrison, there's something else you need to know about your son's operation. The trap that injured this cub. Tommy didn't set it to capture bears for traffickers. He set it as part of a federal sting operation designed to catch the real traffickers in the act." Michael stared at his son in confusion. "But the cub was injured, nearly died." "Because the real traffickers moved the trap," Tommy explained, his voice heavy with guilt. "I'd positioned it in a location where no animals would be harmed, with federal agents standing by to prevent any actual captures. But the trafficking ring suspected something and relocated the trap to an active game trail. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late." Eleanor's reaction was characteristically direct. So you're telling me that my grandson has been playing the most dangerous game of pretend in the world, letting his family think he was lost forever, all to protect creatures that can't protect themselves? Yes, ma'am, Agent Rodriguez confirmed. Your grandson is going to receive commendations from 3 federal agencies for his work on this case. The trafficking ring we've dismantled was responsible for the illegal capture and sale of over 200 protected animals, including grizzly bears, wolves, and endangered bird species. The bear cub, as if sensing the emotional intensity of the moment, struggled to sit up in Eleanor's lap. Its injured leg was stabilized and healing, and its dark eyes showed the alertness of a healthy young animal. Dr. Chen smiled as she checked its reflexes in response to stimuli. This little one is going to make a full recovery, she announced. Thanks to Eleanor's refusal to give up and some genuine medical miracles, we're looking at a complete healing with minimal long-term effects. Outside, Athena had approached the van and was standing quietly beside the rear door, her massive head visible through the opening. She watched her cub with maternal pride and something that looked remarkably like gratitude as she observed the humans who had fought so hard to save her offspring's life. Michael looked at his son, his mother, and the bear family they'd helped reunite, feeling emotions too complex for words. The past 15 years of guilt, grief, and separation were being rewritten by revelations that changed everything he thought he knew about his family's story. "Son," he said finally, "I think it's time you came home. Really came home this time." Tommy's smile was the first genuine expression of happiness Michael had seen from him since his return. "I'd like that, Dad." "I'd like that very much." But even as the Harrison family began to heal from 15 years of separation and misunderstanding, they knew that the real work of rebuilding their relationships was just beginning. Trust, once broken, required time and patience to repair, and some wounds ran too deep to disappear overnight. The road ahead would be long and sometimes difficult, but for the first time in years, they would walk it together. 6 months after a grizzly bear had walked through the doors of Glacier Falls Police Station, the town had transformed into something none of its residents could have imagined. The story of Athena and her cub, now officially named Hope, had spread across social media with the hashtag #FamilyHasNoPause, drawing visitors from around the world to witness the place where love had transcended species barriers. The economic revival that followed brought new life to a community that had been slowly dying, but more importantly, it brought the Harrison family back together in ways that healing hearts could finally embrace. Eleanor Harrison sat on the porch of her small house, watching her grandson Tommy teach his 6-month-old daughter, Sarah Rose, to recognize different bird calls. The baby girl, named after both her late grandmother and Dr. Sarah Chen, who had delivered her, gurgled with delight as her father pointed to the sky and made soft, hooting sounds. Tommy's wife, Dr. Chen, worked in the garden nearby, her pregnancy with their second child beginning to show as she tended to the vegetables that would feed both their growing family and the recovering wildlife at their expanded sanctuary. "Love doesn't work like a pie where each person gets a smaller slice," Eleanor murmured, repeating the wisdom she'd shared with her family countless times over the past months. "It's more like a candle lighting another candle. The more you share, the brighter everything gets." Michael Harrison, now officially retired from the Sheriff's Department and serving as the director of the Harrison Wildlife Sanctuary, approached the porch carrying a folder thick with correspondence from around the world. Letters from children, donations from animal lovers, and requests for speaking engagements had poured in steadily since the story broke. But it was the official document on top of the pile that made his weathered face break into a proud smile. "Tommy's commendation came through," he announced, holding up the certificate that formally recognized his son's 3 years of undercover work with federal wildlife agencies. Presidential Citation for Service Above and Beyond the Call of Duty in Protecting Endangered Species. Tommy looked up from his daughter, his face showing the peace that had slowly replaced the haunted expression he'd carried for so many years. "You know what means more to me than any government recognition, Dad. Waking up every morning in the same town where I was born, watching my daughter grow up surrounded by the same mountains and forests that shaped me. Having family Sunday dinners where we all sit around Grandma's table and nobody's pretending to be someone they're not." The sanctuary itself had become a model for human-wildlife coexistence that drew researchers and conservationists from universities across the nation. Built on land that the town had donated and funded through tourism revenue and private donations, it provided a safe haven for injured wildlife while educating visitors about the importance of protecting natural habitats. The centerpiece was a large, naturalistic enclosure where Athena and Hope lived comfortably, visible to visitors, but with plenty of private space to be wild bears. Dr. Chen straightened from her gardening and wiped soil from her hands, her expression thoughtful as she watched her husband and daughter. "You know what strikes me most about this whole experience? It's how many people told us that what we were doing was impossible. That bears can't remember human kindness, that families can't heal from that kind of separation, that small towns can't reinvent themselves. But love doesn't care about statistics or conventional wisdom." Eleanor chuckled, the sound carrying the same warmth that had sustained her family through decades of hardship. "Honey, I've been telling people that for 78 years. Sometimes the most important truths sound impossible until they happen right in front of your eyes." The afternoon visiting session at the sanctuary was winding down, and Michael could see the last tour group making their way toward the exit. These daily tours had become a pilgrimage of sorts for people seeking proof that love and forgiveness were still possible in a world that often seemed broken beyond repair. Families who had been estranged for years would come to see Athena and Hope, then find themselves talking honestly for the first time in decades. Couples on the verge of divorce would watch the Bear family's devotion to each other and remember why they had fallen in love. "The documentary crew is coming back next month for the one-year anniversary filming," Michael mentioned, settling into the rocking chair beside his mother. "They want to do follow-up interviews about how the story has impacted the community long-term." Tommy bounced little Sarah Rose on his knee, making her laugh with silly faces that would have seemed impossible from the hardened man who had returned to Glacier Falls 6 months earlier. "I keep thinking about something Agent Rodriguez said during the debriefing. He told me that most undercover operations end with agents needing therapy to remember who they really are. But coming home, being surrounded by family and doing work that matters, it didn't feel like recovering my identity. It felt like discovering who I was, always meant to be." Dr. Chen approached the porch carrying a basket of fresh vegetables and wearing the contented expression of someone who had found her place in the world. "The pregnancy is going wonderfully," she said, anticipating the question that Michael asked daily. "Dr. Williams says everything looks perfect." "This little one is going to grow up in a world where their father is a hero, their great-grandmother is a legend, and their grandfather proved that it's never too late to choose love over fear." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to set the landscape on fire, the Harrison family gathered on the porch for their daily ritual of watching the Bears' evening activities. Athena and Hope had developed a routine of playful wrestling that never failed to draw crowds of delighted visitors. But in the quiet hours after the sanctuary closed, their interactions took on a more intimate quality that felt almost sacred. "Look at that," Eleanor whispered, pointing to where Hope had curled up against her mother's massive form. "That little one doesn't know how close she came to dying. All she knows is that she's loved, protected, and home where she belongs." Tommy shifted his daughter to his other arm, his voice soft with emotion. Sometimes I think about the night I left 15 years ago. How angry I was, how certain that love wasn't enough to fix what was broken. I spent all those years trying to prove that family was just an illusion, that people inevitably hurt each other and walk away. But watching Mom and Hope together, seeing how Athena never gave up on finding help for her baby, it makes me realize that love isn't just something that exists between people. It's a force that shapes everything, if we're brave enough to trust it. Michael reached over and took his son's free hand, a gesture that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Your mother used to say that love wasn't a feeling, it was a decision. Every day you decide whether to build bridges or walls, whether to forgive or hold grudges, whether to believe in second chances or give up on people. I spent 15 years thinking I'd failed as a father, but what I really failed at was making the daily decision to keep loving you even when you were gone. Dr. Chen settled into the remaining porch chair, her hands resting on her growing belly. The researchers who come to study the sanctuary always ask about the science behind what happened. How did Athena remember Michael after 15 years? How did she know to bring her injured cub to humans for help? But I think they're asking the wrong questions. The real question is, why we're so surprised when love creates miracles. Maybe the miracle isn't that a bear remembered human kindness. Maybe it's that humans remembered how to be kind. As darkness fell over Glacier Falls, the porch light created a warm circle of illumination that seemed to hold the Harrison family in a protective embrace. Baby Sarah Rose had fallen asleep in her father's arms, her tiny fist curled around Tommy's finger in a grip that spoke of absolute trust. In the distance, the soft sounds of Athena and Hope settling in for the night provided a peaceful soundtrack to the quiet conversation of 3 generations who had learned that some bonds are stronger than time, distance, or even death. Eleanor's voice carried the wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to see the full circle of pain and healing. You know what I'm most grateful for? It's not that we all found our way back to each other, though that's surely a blessing. It's that we learned something about the nature of love itself. Real love doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't keep score or hold grudges. It just keeps showing up day after day, believing in people even when they can't believe in themselves. Michael looked at his family, his son holding his granddaughter, his daughter-in-law carrying his future grandchild, his mother radiating the contentment of someone who had lived to see her family whole again, and felt a peace that had eluded him for 15 years. Tomorrow, he said quietly, I'm going to call the mayor about expanding the sanctuary. If we've learned anything from Athena and Hope, it's that there are more families out there who need safe places to heal, both human and otherwise. The stars emerged one by one above Glacier Falls, Montana, shining down on a town that had discovered that miracles don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the form of a desperate mother seeking help for her child, and leave behind the kind of love that changes everything it touches. In the sanctuary enclosure, Athena lifted her massive head and looked toward the porch where the humans sat in quiet communion. For a moment her dark eyes met Michael's across the distance, and in that gaze was a recognition that transcended species. The acknowledgement between 2 parents who had learned that love, patience, and never giving up could overcome even the most impossible circumstances. Family, they had all learned, has nothing to do with species, and everything to do with the willingness to fight for each other, no matter the cost. Dear friends, if you're watching this story and feeling tears in your eyes, you're not alone. At 55, 60, or 68, we've all experienced the ache of broken family bonds, the regret of words left unsaid, and the fear that it might be too late to heal old wounds. Eleanor Harrison at 78 proved that love doesn't have an expiration date. Her grandson Tommy had been gone for 15 years, 15 years of wondering, hoping, and never giving up on the boy she raised. How many of us have adult children we've lost touch with, grandchildren we barely know, family members we miss but don't know how to reach? This story reminds us that sometimes the smallest gesture, like a bear seeking help, can open doors we thought were permanently closed. Eleanor's wisdom echoes what we've learned through decades of living. Love isn't about holding tight, it's about letting go and trusting it finds its way home. Family isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for at any age. Every sunrise is a new chance to rebuild bridges, forgive old hurts, and choose love over pride. What family relationship in your life needs healing? Have you ever experienced a miracle moment when love conquered years of separation? Please share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what another heart needs to hear today.